Fourth observation, which is in many ways a consequence of what I just said and the deep-rootedness of these movements in their own societies, military means to defeat them have not worked. It didn't work in the case of Hamas, whether it was Fatah and the Palestinian Authority that was going after it in Gaza, or when Israel's war of 2008. It certainly hasn't worked in Lebanon either, the war of 2006. In all these cases, military means at best haven't worked, at worst have backfired, and in some cases have strengthened the hold of the entities that these military operations were designed to defeat. The fifth observation is that one of the tools that the US and others have used to try to diminish the influence and the resonance of these movements is by providing assistance to their opponents. A lot of assistance has gone to the Palestinian Authority, to President Abbas, and support has gone to March 14th. To a large extent, I think that misses the point. To say it quite crudely, President Abbas suffers from many things and faces many problems. One problem he doesn't face in the eyes of his own people is the perception that he's insufficiently supported by the United States. That's not why many Palestinians are questioning the legitimacy of the leadership. There are a whole host of questions. But the notion that by giving more assistance to President Abbas, somehow we can neutralize the perception that the Palestinian leadership, the current Palestinian leadership, is too indebted to the West and not autonomous enough in its decision-making is, to me, seems misguided. So in a way, the more the US pumps aid into the hands of those that these movements are opposing, it validates, it may help them in some ways, but it also validates the narrative that Hezbollah and Hamas and others want to propagate, that the ones they're fighting are stooges of the West. And so I think it really is a double-edged sword to keep in mind. The sixth and final observation is that these movements feed on the underlying grievances that I mentioned earlier, these unresolved core existential issues. And at the same time, these issues can't be resolved if they are excluded. And just to take the two cases of the Palestinian and the Lebanese, there may be disagreement on this, but my strong conviction is that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to truly resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict if we don't address the question of Hamas, for all kinds of reasons having to do with the fact that they control Gaza, with the fact that the Palestinian movement is divided to an extent that I don't think any liberation movement has been divided and been able to reach an agreement by negotiating with its foe, the legitimacy question that it's hanging over the leadership in Ramallah. For all these questions, I think it just makes, it reduces President Abbas's maneuvering room, and it makes it more possible for spoilers to step into the fray. So the notion that you could move the peace process without addressing the question of Hamas seems to me to be an illusion. And that's why the logic that I hear and that David Makovsky put forward earlier, and which you hear all the time, which is, let's move the peace process first, and then we'll find a way. Hamas will be confronting this dilemma, confronting the dilemma of whether to join a process that's popular or oppose it. I don't think you'll ever get there, because Hamas has many tools and has showed time and again that it has the tools to sabotage, to prevent, and simply to spoil a process from which it would be not just absent, but of which it would be a target. And the same, of course, goes in Lebanon. The notion that one could have a stable government in Lebanon by excluding the most powerful representative of the most numerous constituency in Lebanon seems to me, again, to be profoundly misguided. I think we've seen it. I think the Lebanese have paid the price for some of the illusions that the West had, that they could sort of build Lebanon by excluding a party that, again, is not just a party. It's really the embodiment at this point of the Shiite constituency. So for that reason, I think we're caught in this dilemma of how do you address these underlying grievances which fuel the power of these movements, at the same time as you need to bring these movements somehow into the game if you want to be able to fully address those issues. So we come to the question with which I began, which is, what then? What are the options? What can we do if the policies of the past have failed, and if we're confronting what I say is a very major and significant factor, at least in those two contexts? Drawing from what I just said, I think the first rule is, of course, what not to do. The notion that you could marginalize, ignore, exclude, or try to defeat militarily. I think we need to put those aside because they simply have not worked. We, the United States, don't have the means to accomplish them, and the people in the region can't live with the consequences of our unsuccessfully trying to do so. It's just too costly for them. Now, as I said, I don't think the debate should be reduced to the question of whether we talk to them or not. I think Mitchell Reese gave presentation about different contexts where it may work or not. We talk to some, we don't talk to others. In some cases, it may be premature. In some cases, it may be futile. In some cases, it may be counterproductive or too costly politically. And we are in a very political city, and we know the cost sometimes of doing things, even if they might be wise diplomatically. They may simply be too costly politically. But it's a very reductionist view to believe that either you talk to them or you stay where we are today. There's a whole host of other instruments in our toolbox, from encouraging third parties to talk to them, but in a authorized channel, not the kind of talks that take place today, and of which I'm a part, where we talk to Hamas and Hezbollah, and both sides get frustrated. Their side gets frustrated because we have nothing to offer, and we get frustrated because they're not giving us anything in return. So that becomes a bit of dialogue of the deaf. I think you need to think more about empowering third parties. In the case of Hamas, I think it means not necessarily the U.S. talking to Hamas, but changing its attitude, its whole mindset, when it comes to Palestinian reconciliation, and to stop seeing it as an obstacle to peace, but rather, as I argued, as one of the preconditions for peace, which is to find a way to restitch the Palestinian national movement. It means changing our approach towards Gaza, and it's not simply a humanitarian question. It's a political question. The humanitarian disaster in Gaza came about for political reasons, and it will be resolved when we reach a different political conclusion. It has to do with how we are prepared to deal with Hamas in Gaza. And then in the case of Hezbollah, which I think is far more complex, far more complicated for a whole host of reasons, I think it entails maybe not talking to Hezbollah, that may come later, but finding a different way to engage with Syria, and at the very least, not repeating the mistake of 2008, where the administration seemed, or at least March 14th in Lebanon, seemed to believe that we would come to their assistance if they were in a confrontation with Hezbollah. And as it turned out, they were left out there to dry, and we were not able to do anything to help them. Very quickly, in conclusion, I mean, two thoughts that I want to leave with you. The first is I think we have to escape the dual illusion that is too often, I think, handcuffed our policy. The belief that engagement is the ultimate reward that the United States can offer its foes, which is only the flip side of that other dangerous illusion, which is that isolation is a decisive penalty that we can inflict upon them. I think we need to escape both those ends of the spectrum. And then one last thought. Mitchell Reese said something, I think, which is very important, which is many of these movements don't have the experience. They don't have the wherewithal to really engage in the kind of talks that we're talking about. They need training. And I'll just bring to your attention the fact that one of the things that I think is extremely damaging, we have a law in the books here, which prevents anyone not simply from giving money to terrorist groups, which I can understand, but from providing any form of material assistance, which the Supreme Court and the administrations have interpreted as including assistance to try to train them in negotiations or train them in nonviolent means of resistance, train them to, or talk to them to give them advice about how to move from a violent to nonviolent or to accepting the Quartet principles. We're not allowed to do that. I think that's a profound irony. It's a profound disservice to the people in the region and to ourselves. Thank you.